littlest kids. One of the things we're doing is supporting and intensifying the things that are happening back at the green zone. We teach more. We have somebody who develops a relationship, and they teach more about the clear expectations. They give them more frequent feedback. They give them a lot more positives. They're a lot faster in their corrective behavior. So as we build the yellow zone system in particular, if the green zone is not in place, it can be very confusing to kids to be taught something extra. And again, the green zone may be only in your classroom. I get that. But make sure that you have that in place as we build up into the yellow zone for your students, so that when we develop the plans, the programs at the yellow zone, we can build on what we already have. Do not, I want to repeat, do not be discouraged by the lack of PBS in your school building to where you don't do it in your classroom. Effective practices are effective practices. It's not ideal, but do them in the classroom so that you can build the yellow support systems on top of it. What's the key process, or what are the key elements of a yellow zone system? We have to know how to identify who are our students who are at risk. Who are our yellow zone students? What are the supports that they need? We provide those supports, and then we evaluate to see that we're A, doing what we said we'd do, and B, getting positive student outcomes. The same process is going to apply to some extent at the FBA and BSP level, right? You develop a program of supports, you implement, you check to see if you're doing it, and if you're getting the positive student outcomes. I want you to take a few minutes in your team or group, and I want you to pull out this single sheet. It has a pyramid with a column that says assessment and a column that says intervention. Does everybody have this? I want you to just talk through a few minutes. Do you have these things in place? When we go back to the green zone, you can look in your notes and see the universal interventions. Those are the things you put here. Do we have 3 to 5 positively stated rules? Do we have them posted? Do we have the daily schedule, the class outline, etc.? What are the support systems we have in place? How do you identify your yellow zone students? What supports do you have in place for them? Don't go into the red zone yet. Do the green and yellow zone for the next few minutes. Questions about the task? Okay, I'll be around through the room to give some support. We're going to take just a few minutes. 2 and 1. Any of you find this frustrating? Yeah. So I was just asked by some folks here, what do I do if we don't have that in place and our kids are going between environments? And we're going to talk more about the systems change piece, but I want to go back to saying you have to know what you're advocating for and why. That's why I'm going back through this. I know many of you are very familiar with PBIS. And make sure that you can advocate in an articulate way. Why does it matter if you have 3 to 5 rules in the school? Because people are getting pulled in different directions. Somebody, you were saying, had 6 principals in 6 years. Imagine having 6 principals a day as you go from class to class. I mean, I think these things really do matter. Let's see. Okay. So how are you identifying your yellow zone students currently?
Yes. Behavior reports.
Behavior reports?
We have a system of behavior reporting. That's
Okay.
what identifies. If the same behavior is popping up, those kids get targeted.
Okay. So as you probably know, just the basics about a secondary level system called Check-in Checkout, as Terry talked about, is the idea that if you have an escape motivated kid, this isn't the plan. right? You remember this one, this piece of it? If you have an escape-motivated kid, eliminate the need to escape. If they're not placed appropriately in the curriculum, if they're being bullied and harassed, whatever it is, you have to look at that issue of why are they trying to escape, because the core components around check-in, check-out are effective about 2/3 of the time. The group that it doesn't work for are often escape motivated. If you have students that are escape motivated, come back and look at the reason why they're trying to escape and say, can we back up and change that need to escape? When we look, though, at identifying these kids, if it waits for people to refer them, who gets missed? We pick the kids who externalize their behavioral issues, and we miss the kids who internalize their behavior issues. So creating systems to identify these kids is important. Yes?
We have a case management form where we have everybody fill out once a week and give it to the social worker. It's small enough that works.
Yes.
So that you think about every kid at least once a week for a minute and you don't.
That's really, I don't know if you heard that. They have a form that each person, each teacher fills out on each student weekly and gives them to the case manager so that they're tracking. And I think in your packets, do you find in your packets there's a couple of examples of, maybe not. Sherry, do you know where they are? This is the piece, the risk screening and the risk follow-up. That's what it should look like, yes.
Packet with assessment intervention pyramid on top of it.
So it should say XXXX elementary risk screening form, and right behind it is the risk status checklist. This is an example of one thing that some schools do weekly is amazing. That's very, very impressive. I've seen it done monthly. I've seen it done quarterly. You can also use if you track your behavior referrals, that's a way of doing it. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but if you're not systematic in setting up your secondary level system, your yellow zone system, you will end up with too many kids coming into your FBA process. And what we know, again, backing up, what we know from the research is that 65 to 67% of kids that go into a high fidelity check-in, check-out program, that's enough. Now, again, that leaves out a group, doesn't it? And that's the kids who may be escape motivated and the kids who are going to need the full functional assessment and behavior support plan. Questions about this? I know this is, if you haven't been through, I know some of you probably, how many of you did not see Terry's piece on check-in, check-out? Okay. So at some point we may need to have some additional little pieces that you can look at, or are they videotaped as well? So you may want to go in and take a look at this. There's also the behavior education program book has a DVD that goes with it.
Well, we have that in our library.
That's in the library. So I'd encourage you to pull some of those things out and look at that. One of the things that, and I'll get to your question in just a second, one of the things about the check-in, check-out system, it's not simply time to spend with somebody who cares. That's nice, but if you're not doing all the elements, you may in fact be wasting time. So make sure that all the critical elements are there so that you can be most effective with your students. Judith.
I just wanted to ask if you could give me a very brief definition of check-in, check-out.
Check-in, check-out is an individualized program that's done to support the things that are in place for the green zone. We identify our kids who are at risk as a group, and those students would very quickly be referred to and receive, we're not talking about waiting 6 to 8 weeks, very quickly receive, be identified, and they move to having a person who checks in that they check in with in the morning and check out with in the afternoon. In the morning, some people say it's sort of a parental role. How was your evening? What did you do this weekend? How's your morning going? Etc. They check in to see if they've got their assignments, if they've got their materials, are they ready to go to class, and they give them a point card. That point card is set up around all of the things that are set up in the green zone. And what they're going to do is they're going to remind them of their rules. Now, this is where it gets hard. When your school has 450 rules on 15 pages in a handbook that they see for 13 seconds at the beginning of the year, it's going to make it very hard to do this. But one of the critical elements is restating the rules, sending them out into classrooms where the teachers have agreed to give them feedback, meaningful feedback on their behavior relevant to those 3 to 5 positively stated rules, and they will get a higher degree of positive feedback, more immediate correction. At the end of the day, they come back and check out with the same person, who then goes through that behavior, that point card with them, helps debrief them and say, what could you do, does some problem solving. They track the data on a weekly basis, increased contact with home. I personally really like having the kids see their data. I think that's important and valuable. Evidence-based in reading, growth, etc. And then there's monthly conferences. I've seen some places do it quarterly with the family. There's notes going home regularly as to how the student is doing, what they're working on, how they're progressing.
Is the card something that teachers during the day comment on or somehow?
Elementary school students, typically they will do it in maybe between recess. Depends on how fast the student needs that feedback. Some can do it every hour. Some will say until the first recess, between the first recess and lunch, between lunch. At middle and high school where they're rotating, it's typically at the end of each period. The student is responsible for going up and saying, Ms. Bianchi, can I have you do my, yep, I'll do it. Ooh, we know, Dale, you really struggled today with staying on task. That's not responsible. Can't give you a 3, can only give you a 2. Now, if it's I go up and give them the card and they go, yep, here you go. We've just lost a huge, valuable piece of a check-in, check-out program. But we want to have these kinds of systems in place before we go up to the FBA. Because if you don't, we're doing FBAs on kids that we have a much more streamlined, efficient program to do it. I don't know if you've heard the analogy of when you put the crowbar under something that you want to move, you put it at the place that the least amount of effort creates the greatest amount of change. You don't put it where it's the hardest. And so I recognize that in schools where you don't have the green zone in place school-wide, you're often putting the crowbar in the hardest place to move things. I get that. So what we want to do is go back and be able to knowledgeably, articulately speak about what needs to be there and why. Now I'll tell you, some people are not comfortable doing this. I get that. Doesn't mean you have to be pushy, but just saying it. If there's anything we've learned from the political system in the last 15 to 20 years, it's that if you say something over and over enough, people start moving in that direction. So start talking about it, keep talking about it, keep working on it. It may be that you have moved on to another job or another program, but they'll go, hey, that's the same thing she said. You know, I've heard that from 2 people now, to where they start telling other people what they've heard. Prerequisite practices, knowledge and skills. Okay, let's take a look at this. Clear expectations. Why do clear expectations matter? Do you remember this one? Dog rules. Dog rule number 1, the dog is not allowed in the house. Number 2, okay, the dog is allowed in the house, but only in certain rooms. 3, okay, the dog is allowed in all rooms, but must stay off the furniture. 4, the dog can get on the old furniture. 5, fine, the dog is allowed on all the furniture, but is not allowed to sleep with the humans on the bed. 6, okay, the dog is allowed on the bed, but only by invitation. 7, the dog can sleep on the bed whenever he wants to, but is, not allowed under the covers. 8, the dog can sleep under the covers at the invitation of the humans. 9, the dog can sleep under the covers at night, followed by 10, humans must ask permission to sleep under the covers with the dog. I'm not calling kids dogs. I had somebody come up during a break one time and say, that's really demeaning, calling them dogs. No, we all do this, right? Humans push. If you don't believe that, check out your freeway system. People are all going the speed limit, right? Right? We all push the limits. If it's inconsistent, it's going to be very hard, and we're always going to be pushing. One of the pieces around change is meeting people's needs. Teachers do not like being challenged. If you don't want to be challenged, be consistent. The more consistent, less challenge. Well, Mrs. Jimenez doesn't make me do that. Mr. Smith said I can do that in his class and he doesn't care. Now what happens? Now we all pay for that. If you want it, teach it. There's 2 rules I'm going to give you today that I think are the critical elements in behavior planning. Number 1 is if you want it, teach it. Over and over and over if necessary. Rule number 1, if you want it, teach it. I want you to help me out here. I'm going to say the first, you're going to say the last part, right? Well, I want to make sure you got this. If you want it, teach it. If you want it, teach it. Excellent, good. Okay, we want to explicitly teach those. We talked a little bit about having lesson plans for each of the areas or activities and a teach and reteach calendar. These are infrastructural systems to prompt the adults to do what they need to do so the kids will be successful. We want to use a structure, a model, lead, and test format. I do it, we do it, you do it. In order to know what we're teaching, we need to do a task analysis. How many of you have ever done a task analysis? Okay, some more of you are going to do that today. Here's the deal. I think there's a page in the handout here that says task analysis. Yep, just basically almost a blank page. See this page right here? Task analysis. I want every person here to pair up with one other person, pairs of 2. If you're in a 3, try to move in with somebody else. What I want you to do is I want you to write the step-by-step task analysis for making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It just so happens that this comes before lunch. You will have a plate. You will have a jar of peanut butter. You will have a jar of jam. You will have some napkins. You will have a knife. You can assume that people can follow directions that you give them, but you are going to give them the step-by-step directions. I want you to write down so that somebody else can follow your directions using those materials, those supplies. I want you to write the step-by-step directions for making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Questions about the task? Okay, begin now. You've got about 4 minutes. Yep, better get rolling.